I'm Bill Hodgson. I own and run the OTC space, and I'm proud today to be hosting a webinar with RegTek Solutions and DTCC. So speaking today is going to be Brian Lynch, who's Chief Executive of RegTek Solutions. Along with him is his colleague Alan McIntyre, who is a Senior BA and Industry Relations person. We've also got Mark Stedman, who's the European Head of Product Development at DTCC, and Stuart McClymont from Base 60 Consulting, who some of you may know as being a long-standing contributor to market infrastructure from various angles. So we're going to do the webinar in two sort of overall parts. One is going to be a general discussion about the rules coming up in November, various facets of why that's a problem, things you need to do, fields, collateral, LEIs, validations, and we're going to give you a live demo, hopefully, of a piece of software from RegTek, their EMEA Ready tool. And then in the second part, Mark is going to talk about how DTCC are doing significant re-engineering on their GTR, and we got some slides there to talk about what that means. So in the software you're using, there's two things you should know about. One is asking questions. So there is a questions panel. And if you ask those as we go along, I'll do my best to insert those into the discussion as possible. And the other one is there's two downloads. One is a brochure on the EMEA Ready service, and one is a PDF of our Rocket magazine, which you may or may not have seen before. So I think, Brian, I think it's over to you to talk about the difference in what is the difference between the RTS rewrite and the EMEA review.
Thanks, Bill. So the fact that we have 400 people registered for this means this is fairly topical, and I'm sure most people will understand this. But I just want to point out that we're very focused today on the revision of Article 9 that's due on November 1st. And we're going to be talking in detail about that. There's a lot of detail to get through, so we may be going through fairly quickly. And we're hoping that this will spurn further discussions with folks who are interested. There is a further EMEA review that's underway right now. We don't expect the impact of that review to happen for 18 to 20 months, 24 months from where we are today. We're already predicting, or the market is already anticipating some fairly marked changes there, like reductions in responsibility of reporting around listed derivatives, as well as reduction in reporting responsibilities for NFCs. Unfortunately, none of those impact people today, and none of those will ease the burden of people on November 1st. So it's relevant that those folks are here and listening into this webinar, because we're focused on the crunch time of the next 6 months.
Thanks, Brian. Okay, so I think we got another slide on this new service called EMEA Ready. It's best that Brian explains it because it's certainly relevant to meeting your November the 1st deadline.
Yes, thanks, Bill. So, the reason why vendors like us host webinars like this is because we also have some skin in the game here. This will be the only gratuitous plug of the day, I promise you. But we do have a product called EMEA Ready. It is a product that has a single-minded focus of trying to help firms reduce the cost, the effort, and the risk of this particular EMEA implementation. So it's not a long-term commitment, it's a rental, and it's something that it will offer firms additional support around the analysis of the impact of change, the development of their software to meet the new changes, and the testing of that software, as well as being a channel and a bridge to the DTCC, which is where a lot of the changes that we're dealing with manifest themselves. Mark is going to talk to us today about some of the specific DTCC changes which are in a response to this, to these RTS reviews. But we're also going to talk about the actual regulatory impacts and the fields and the validations, etc., that flow from that.
Thanks, Brian. So next up we have Stuart McClymont. Stuart, I've known for many years, and he's worked both at Deutsche Bank and in other locations on many industry infrastructure projects. And I think, Stuart, if you're there, we're interested in hearing about what are people doing to get ready for November the 1st.
Yeah, I think, Bill, I mean, certainly the revised kind of RTS not only enforces additional validation on kind of existing EMEA reportable fields, but it also has additional fields. And in many instances, actually, those existing fields are now split into more than one field. So pretty complex. Not only do I think firms will need to go back and re-report, but also re-identify new best practices on how to report going forward. I think equally, a number of the EMEA RTS2 fields conflict actually with MiFID 2, which is obviously coming down the pipe as well. So, for example, price notation has got a different value that's allowed in the reports. And obviously this is a challenge as right now the current matching and pairing rates remain very low across the industry. So what are firms doing? I mean, we're helping a number of firms via working groups to try and match as much of the open population ahead November 1st. So let's get what we've got out there agreed and matched. In parallel, agree the best practices, understand how we should be populating certain fields and set best practice and communicate. And then really raise questions and awareness to ESMA and the NCAs around the challenges and the thoughts and the direction and strategy that the industry is going in. And I think finally, really, the key point is the industry is absolutely collaborating right now, trying to resolve these breaks, but it needs more broader participation across users, across central counterparties, trade reporters, etc. And also with the necessary resources, I think, and senior commitment to really tackle this.
Thanks, Stuart. I think Mark wanted to say some things as well.
Yeah, just I think that one of the observations that we're seeing at the moment with industry readiness is a side effect of MiFID, unfortunately. It's been about 18 months now since the last real change in EMEA with the L2 validations, and a lot of the people that we were dealing with then within firms have now moved on to other things, mainly MiFID. So we're seeing a lot of that experience being moved out of the EMEA space and into supporting MiFID. So hence we're now seeing a lot of new faces with a much reduced knowledge of the EMEA regulations and I guess us as a repository. So obviously that imposes its own challenges and risk for the overall delivery in November.
Are you suggesting there's a people expertise shortage?
That yes, basically yes. I mean, what I'm seeing is the industry is focusing there. There's been so much focus on MiFID that a lot of the experienced people have moved. When the L2 validations were complete, then moved on to the MiFID, and I guess because that's been delayed a year, MiFID they're still with that project, and now EMEA's coming up, and we are seeing that in some cases that we're dealing with new faces who don't have the background and the knowledge of than their predecessors might have had.
Okay, well I guess that's down to firms to manage, really. So I guess that leads into your section where you're going to talk about some of these new fields. Yeah,
sure. So I think this shouldn't be treated like it is an overhaul of the technical standards. So the count's gone up from 85 to 129, but that doesn't really tell the full story. If you look at the actual breakdown of the fields, they've reduced, they've actually taken 10 out, so they've actually added 54 new fields. And of those fields that are remaining that weren't changed, there's also about another 22 where the data to be populated has changed. There's also a lot of additional validations, which we'll talk about in a minute. But it is quite an overhaul. Just to give you a kind of a summary there, we've got 12 new collateral fields. We've got 13 across asset class. 14 new interest rate fields, 10 new credit fields. So particularly in certain asset classes, we'll feel the pain a little bit more than others. If you're reporting as DTC in the core, you're actually somewhat insulated by some of these additional fields, actually, because we already get them from firms today, and it kind of, in some respects, reduces the kind of mapping and rules we put in place today. But notwithstanding that, it is a big change. Okay. Sorry, Bill. There's also other concepts such as trade and position level, which and there's different action type validations driven off of those. So it is a fairly substantial change we're looking at.
Okay, so then I think Alan is going to talk a little about collateral fields, because they've gone through a fairly substantial change as well.
Yeah, thanks, Bill. So yeah, collateral has changed substantially in the new RTS. So previously it was only one of the trade parties that had to report the collateral, and that was the party that was actually posting the collateral. And previously they only had to report the overall value of the collateral and the associated currency. But even when that went live under EMIR, when it was first introduced kind of 6 months after EMIR itself, that proved very challenging for a lot of firms, because the feedback we received a lot at the time was the collateral information was simply in different systems to all the trades, and there was a headache there. Fast forward to now, the new RTS changes it in two main ways. Firstly, it's both trade parties need to report the collateral, and secondly, that collateral is broken down into far more granular buckets. So each party now has to post the initial margin and both posted and received, the variation margin posted and received, and the excess margin if there is any posted and received. So they need to break it down into far more detail and report the currency codes that go with that. This is likely to be quite a challenge from the firms we are talking to. Especially when you look across the pond and you see that the CFTC for Dodd-Frank are proposing moving in a very different direction. So yeah, I would expect this one to be quite challenging.
Do these collateral fields end up being reconciled with the other person's submission?
No, the collateral is not reconcilable, but it's more just the challenge getting the data across your trade population and figuring out what collateral belongs to what trades. That's going to be one of the main things.
Okay. Thanks, Alan. Okay. So then another topic is LEIs. They're becoming a lot more important than currently, and Mark is going to give us some background on that.
Yeah, this is an interesting point. I've been to Conifer banging on about this for quite some time to anybody who listen. There is, I think there's, and again back to my previous point about the focus being on MiFID, there's been a lot of focus in the industry on requiring an LEI for MiFID. And I think that's particularly prevalent when MiFID the go live date was January 2017. Now they've put MiFID back a year. We're looking at the RTS coming into place before MiFID, and the same applies for the EMIR RTS. Whilst there's not explicitly as definitive in the language in the text that you shall not trade with a counterparty who does not have an LEI, there is the same implicit requirement there, because it does firmly state in the level 2 text that you must report your counterparty with an LEI as well as yourself, unless that counterparty is an individual. So in that case, there is, and I think, an implicit requirement there that you should be trading with counterparties who have an LEI. If you don't, I guess that you either can't report accurately or can't report at all. So that's the first thing. There is much more onerous validations as well against the LEI. This was actually a bit of an overhang from the L2 validations. They did originally plan to put this in the L2, and then they de-scoped it to just to be a digit check. But going forward, you do need an LEI. You need a valid LEI as well if you're reporting the reporting party or data submitter. By valid, I mean it needs to be current. I guess I liken this to a gym membership or an MOT. You have to annually subscribe and keep your LEI valid. This in itself actually is a bit of a problem, I think, because I think it tends to incentivize firms to not get an LEI until they have to, right at the last minute, because they know they have to then renew it a year later. So it's a bit like, if your car's not due its MOT till the end of the year, why would you MOT it now? I think there is a certain amount of that. Notwithstanding that, we do recommend firms to get on the case. It's not that expensive in the grand scheme of things, and to get the LEI now, because what we don't want is a mad rush at the end of the year when it's required.
Mark, I know the industry has in the past talked about sort of figuring out creative ways of getting smaller counterparties. Particularly difficult to get non-EU counterparties to register LEIs. Are there any joint initiatives at this point that you're aware of where the market's going to try and ensure that they have LEIs for all these firms out there?
Yeah, I think the market might actually drive this through in the end, Brian. So if at the end of the day, if the bigger dealers stop trading with firms outside of Europe because they don't have an LEI, that's probably a good incentive for someone, for example, maybe in APAC or the US to get an LEI. I mean, the LEI is becoming a global standard. There's no doubt about it. And in other jurisdictions, we fully expect other jurisdictions to follow suit under EMIR, particularly EMIR and MiFIR. But I think the market will probably sort that out itself in the long run. There may be some short disruption just after go live, but I think if they stop trading with firms who don't have an LEI, then I think that'll probably sort the solution out.
And also,
sorry,
bro, I was going to say, certainly we've been involved in basically bringing a number of firms together earlier this year to at least agree a standard way to approach and what to request from clients. Now, each organization is now using that in their outreach efforts. So there's definitely an appetite from the sell side, particularly, to really drive forward their clients to get LEIs. They clearly see the benefit, the simplification, the standardization it brings. The trick is how do you get the clients to respond? And I think the more of these kind of webinars and communication sessions and forums on the benefits of why you need to get an LEI, getting it is actually quite easy, but it's actually not being apathetic and actually going out and getting that information ahead of time. Because again, the local operating units, they've already raised the red flag that if they were hit the day before for all the required LEIs that counterparties need to get, they couldn't process them in time. So as Mark said, now's the time to really start to get yourself an LEI and have the right infrastructure in place to support it and use it going forward.
And Mark, your DTCC is going to be rejecting reports if they don't have LEI in these fields. So, what are we expecting to happen? Like, how big a backlog of unreported trades do you think we could end up seeing in November and December where firms just simply don't have them?
Well, I think there's a couple of things here. The LEI is required on a number of different fields, and for certain, some of them for sure we would reject where the only option is to provide an LEI. You can identify your counterparty with an internal client code, but again, this is what I was referring to as an implicit requirement here, because in the technical standards, it does say that you should only use an internal client code when your counterparty is an individual. So in that case, there is a way that firms can do it, but whether that is not accurate reporting, and certainly I would expect the regulators to be looking at that, and if they see a large number of potential trades against supposed individuals, there may be some kind of questions to be asked. So there is a way, but I think firms should take real notice of how they report.
Okay.
Thanks.
I'd just say in the interest, we have some questions coming in. I think in the interest of time, we need to get through the slides we got to present because there's a lot to say, and then we hopefully will have time at the end to cover some of the questions. But there's 4 questions come in. We'll come back to them. So Brian, there's a bunch of new validations which have consequences. Perhaps you could take us through those.
Yeah. So look, I think the issue here is not the individual validations. The issue is the scale. So Alan is our leader in this space, and he's been living and breathing this project for the last couple of months. We've identified almost 1,400 rule changes in our validation engine. So, and look, that's not to say that every firm out there is going to have the same level of impact, because we do cover 100% the breadth and length of the GTR interfaces. So firms who are using only originally were using OTC Lite will be migrating to a new EU Lite format. They'll still have a fair number of impacts, but that gives you an idea of the scale of the validation. But it's also getting much stricter. So rejections are going to increase. I've no doubt. We've been talking to firms, and when we first started with our validation engine, the mission was reducing NAC rates. Now firms have got their NAC rates pretty good. Even some of the bigger firms, we're seeing NAC rates of as low as 0.25% or 0.5%. So it's not been a focus, but I think we're going to see a spike in November and December because these validations are becoming much stricter. We also know that the regulators have demanded, it's always been there, I think it's always been applied, but now it's very explicit that the regulators are demanding NAC reports from the trade repositories. So they're going to be using rejection reports as a primary means of identifying who needs to be looked at. So the focus on validations is extremely important.
I think that's right, Brian. One of the things we have to do as well is, as well as Article 9, which covers reporting, which firms will be familiar with. There's an Article 81, which there's been some changes there around the repositories having to provide better access to data in a more consistent way. So I think the outcome of that is going to be regulators are going to be armed with much better data themselves to actually look at how accurate and how good the reports are from firms, and that includes obviously NAC and NAC rates.
Yeah. So that's an area of particular support for firms who are using EMEA Ready. So that's why at this point I wanted to switch over, and I'm not going to do a full demonstration, but we did want to provide a little bit of a practical view into what does this mean? What do these changes? Sorry, what do these changes look like? Alan tells me I'm shouting. Sorry, everybody. I'm sitting on my own in a room, so it's not too easy to know. So what I'm looking at here is, can you confirm that everyone can see the right screen here, please, Bill?
Yes, we can see it.
Great. So what we're looking at here is our rules tab of our validation engine for EMEA Ready. And what I've done is I've actually gone and I've filtered it on 2 tags. One is the EMEA RTS Rewrite Plus. So these are rules that we added specifically for the rewrite, and the EMEA RTS Rewrite Minus, which are the rules we've deprecated based on the changes. As Mark pointed out, some of the fields have actually taken away, means those validations disappear. You'll see right now it comes to 1,396 out of our database of 9,088 rules. So pretty substantive change when you look at it, considering that we've built this rule database up over the course of the last 5 years, including Dodd-Frank, EMEA, all the APAC regions, Canada, etc. So quite amazing, much bigger than we expected. It delayed our own release by 2 weeks. So EMEA Ready is actually going out right now instead of early June when we had originally expected. We can also show some practical examples. So basically what I'm going to go and do is I'm going to do a quick validation of a file. We have a concept of preferences in EMEA Ready, which means you're able to turn on or turn off the EMEA Ready validations, which means firms can actually validate their trades pre the RTS rewrite and post, and basically understand the differences between them and how their reports will be impacted by the changes. Let me just go and pick a sample file. I'm going to choose the new EU Lite file. So this is a pretty big change. So OTC Lite and the ETD formats have both been merged into a single EU Lite format. And so even though that's been a fairly simple reporting mechanism for folks, that is a change that's happening. So this is an EU Lite going to the EU data center, and I'm going to upload that. So what we're doing right now is it's only got 10 trades in it. I'm validating them using the two features that I've turned on. So I have my reference data feature, which is our glyph validations, which Mark pointed out are becoming absolutely critical, and the EMEA RTS rewrite features that I described earlier. And if we drill into this particular file, I'll have to make my screen smaller so we can see some of the depth. But I'm showing just my errors. In fact, you know, so some of the trades I had passed my validations. They were good trades, but I had a number that failed. And this first one, we see it's a credit trade where I'm missing. So we try to highlight some of the expected problems that people will see. So wherever we've got new fields or fields that have become mandatory that previously weren't mandatory, I think these are the kind of failures we can expect people to see through their testing processes and potentially in production. So seniority, frequency of payment, calculation basis, these are now mandatory fields in the credit space. We also see here the expected failures that we'll see around LEI. So if I actually go and look at this particular trade, we'll see what's happening here is that this is we'll see an individual trade message here. And as we can see, it's failing glyph validation. So previously, the validation was a simple check digit check. Now you're going to actually have to go in and check that the LEI is a valid LEI at glyph. And clearly this isn't. I can actually pick up a good LEI and we'll replace it in those fields. I've got two fields that have got bad data in there. If I replace them and revalidate, now we've got a valid message. Now that will be accepted by the GTR and will be accepted by regulators. So basically just trying to point out some of the key changes and the impacts that folks will be expecting to see as they navigate through this process, and how using a tool like EMEA Ready might really help them surface these issues and get to the root of them much more quickly. I'm not going to go on any further than that. Hopefully gives everyone a flavor of the types of validations, what sort of impacts we expect to see. Again, you know, at an individual level, we see these things are not too complex, but the scale is really where we have problems. So let me hand back to you at that point, Phil.
So another change that's going on in the rewrite is how complex derivatives are reported, and Alan is going to give us an update on that.
Okay, thanks, Bill. So again, complex derivatives is a fairly substantial change in the revised RTS. Previously, the guidance in the RTS and the ESMA Q&As was that firms should report a complex derivative as one report or one UTI on the so-called kind of best fit basis. Now, this in itself was challenging for many firms because the previous 85 fields for EMEA reporting arguably didn't well represent lots of standard derivative contracts, never mind a complex derivative with lots of components. In the new RTS, ESMA has gone in pretty much the complete opposite direction, and the new guidance is that firms should decompose these complex derivatives and report each component or each leg as an individual report or an individual UTI. And then each of these UTIs belonging to the same complex derivative should be linked with a new field which is called Complex Trade Component ID to indicate they're all part of the same complex trade. Now, the good news for firms is they don't need to agree common complex trade component IDs. those can be internal to each firm. They don't need to agree them the same way they have to do for UTIs. The bad news for firms is that they do need to agree on how many components they're going to break it into and the different attributes of each component, because many of these complex derivatives will be included in the intra and inter-TR rec. So if they break them down differently, then it's going to cause all sorts of reconciliation issues. And from quite a few of the clients we've been talking to, this is a concern because their individual kind of treasury management or trade booking systems represent these different legs differently and come into a common view, and what each of the constituents looks like is likely to be quite hard.
Mark, I know it's an edge case, but I have a really quick question for you. If someone's editing a trade, complex derivative they booked and reported before November 1st, and then they've figured out they need to try and fix it for the TREC after November 1st. Sounds like that's going to be a bit of a nightmare.
Yeah, I wouldn't say that's an edge case, Brian. I think it's potentially a common occurrence. So yeah, it is. I mean, they've reported in already with a UTI, so what do? I think that they would. I'd assume probably report it continually as they are now. But I think this is we've been doing some kind of road shows going around clients for probably best part of a year already on some of the big changes, and I always say this is the £300 gorilla in the room type thing. It really is something that's going to be challenging for firms. As Alan referred to, it's not just about how you're reporting, and potentially it affects kind of your booking. So it's almost as if they're looking for firms to align their booking models. And the other thing regarding this is what is a complex derivative? Is an FX swap a complex derivative? It's got two parts to it. So
it's a swaption. Is a swaption.
Exactly. So so it is quite an interesting requirement, I think. But I can understand why they've done it, and it's definitely related to the reconciliation at the moment. There's a lot of trades that don't pair because some firms report them differently. But I don't think this is necessarily going to fix that for the reasons that Alan pointed out.
And I think we got a bit from Alan about UTIs.
Thanks, Bill. Yeah, our old favourite, UTIs. So UTIs on paper, as everyone knows, should have been relatively simple on paper at least. The firms need to agree a common alphanumeric identifier for each trade and report them there. But it's been a pain point since day one, and it's been surprisingly difficult. Now, this probably wasn't helped in the original ESMA. EMIR RTS didn't have a great deal of detail around the generation of UTIs, and then ESMA published some kind of guidance in the Q&As that was a little arbitrary, to say the least. They've attempted to remedy this in the new RTS by publishing some more definitive details. It's on the slides there, so I won't go through it all, but basically they've published a hierarchy around about who's responsible for generating the UTI in different circumstances. More interestingly, for the first time, there's an explicit mandate that about the timeliness for disseminating the UTI. So this is an interesting development. We're saying it's not just who generates the UTI, but you've got to do it in a timely fashion. You've got to share it in a timely fashion. And while it doesn't explicitly say it, there's basically a nod that they're trying to say it should be done in an automated kind of standardised way and not an ad hoc process. So the rules in the RTS do have a caveat that say these apply until a global framework is in place. So that's really a nod to the ongoing work between CPM, IOSCO, and the FSB around working on UTI and trying to put a real framework around that.
Okay, thank you, Alan. So I think we got a final update in this section from Stuart about product identifiers, and then we'll get into the GTR engineering. So Stuart, are you there?
Yeah, no, I mean, certainly, obviously, slide 17 you returned to shows specifically what those descriptions are across the two different legislations. But I think, and it actually goes back to what Mark and Alan both mentioned, that the evidence that we're seeing from the industry EMEA pairing matching work group that we're running is that we have a fundamental problem in the way firms are reporting derivatives based on how they differ in how they capture them and represent them internally. And to be honest, I'm not sure RTS2 helps at all to improve the way firms are able to standardly identify and classify the derivative products. And if you think about it, 30 years ago, we invested as an industry in an instant master agreement, which allowed us to all trade standardly under the same set of legal terms, which really fueled OTC trading activity. And then 15 years ago, we all then realized actually we need to try and electronically match those trades. So we came up with the FPML standard to be able to compare. But at that point, we never resolved the differences in how we today capture internally in our own infrastructures. And really, the result of all this is massive reconciliation and re-reconciliation. And now, I suppose, with CCPs involved, with trade repositories involved, there's even more amount of data which now are being reconciled and continually re-represented. And actually, just a quick update, we're helping run an ISDA working group under the MITOC, the Market Infrastructure Technology and Oversight Committee at ISDA, to develop a standard way for all market participants to book and represent trades based on a kind of common standard process, event and data model. So users can really start to capitalize the technology in front of them and really actually change the way and more consistently represent and book transactions going forward, which will make regulatory reporting so much easier. Now, it's a long journey, and we need all industry participants to participate and contribute in those standards. But again, with the help of Brian and the RegTek guys, I really think that we've got an opportunity to quickly identify what some of these issues and discrepancies and differences are and come up with what those standards need to be and drive them going forward.
Okay, thank you, Stuart. Again, we've had questions coming in. For those of you who ask questions, we will come to them because we seem to be getting through the slides in reasonable pace. So I think the next section is really over to Mark, which is all to do with the fact that they are doing significant work to re-architect or re-engineer the trade repository because of the significant changes. And I think, Mark, that's what we're going to cover in the next section, is it?
Yeah, it is. So I think, first of all, just to take a step back, prior to CFTC, DTCC were effectively awarded a mandate from the industry. We are obviously an industry, not obviously, but if you don't know, we are an industry-owned utility, and we're effectively there for the industry. And our mandate is really effectively to build kind of common utility framework for the industry. So back before CFTC, we took a mandate from the industry to really build on our credit asset servicing platform and also the reporting we were already providing for ODRF, and build on that for the upcoming global G20 regulations that were going to come in. CFTC was the first one off the blocks. So that mandate really was to build a single repository per asset class, and then that was to be a global, to service the global requirements that were going to come down. Pittsburgh 2009, 20 countries took away the same mandate, but unfortunately all came back with very different looking regulations. So that's where we are today. Unfortunately, as we built out, it has been somewhat problematic at times to still fit in with that mandate. And now is a good time for us to kind of take a step back and look at what the future kind of looks like from the GTR perspective. So therefore, we have taken the decision to re-platform, re-architect, and we are very much re-platforming in line with the regulations that we know about today. ESMA being probably the most punitive amongst them with the different validations, etc. So I think on the next few slides, we're just going to go through some of the kind of big changes that are sort of architecturally driven, but at the same time, the drivers really are fundamentally some of the change in regulation anyway. So the first one is the submit, the independently validate each side of the trade. Now, what does this mean? This means basically if you today you can submit for both, and indeed going forward you'll still be able to submit for both. But what we do today is it's an all or nothing. So both sides of the trade have to pass the validations to get accepted into the GTR. We will be changing that, so we'll be independently checking both sides of the trades, which means potentially you could have one side of the trade be accepted, the other side rejected. You will get a single response back from the European repository that will have either 2 ACs on it, an AC, a NAC, or 2 NACs, depending on how each side has been validated. One of the drivers behind this was some early discussions we had with industry related to the LEI, which we discussed earlier. Effectively, you report on behalf of both on the same message. Both sides of that trade are reporting parties, and therefore both sides have to have a valid LEI, and a valid and current LEI under the regulation. That means potentially you could be at risk that your own trade could reject if your counterparty had not renewed their subscription on LEI in the current state. So therefore we've decided to change that and make it independent.
So Mark, I mean that clearly makes sense, because you can't have you're completely locked out of reporting because your counterparty hasn't renewed their LEI. I would imagine it's going to be quite a challenge for firms in terms of the choreography when you get one side ACT and the other side NACT, and then you need to factor in action type and what have you. Gets a little complicated there. What kind of feedback are you getting from round about that?
Yeah, that's probably been the major concern. Obviously, firms can go to a single-sided submission if they want to, or alternatively, if you get a NAC, then you just resubmit on the side that has NAC'd. That's our advice. Just resubmit on the side you've NAC'd.
So, for the sake of clarification, somebody is saying, well, what happens if this circumstance arrives? One side is acknowledged and the other side isn't.
Yep. So you need to submit for the other side, and in our field we have a submitted for field, and you put for both if you want to submit for both. If you just want to submit on behalf of one side of the trade, you would say submit on behalf of trade party 2 or whatever the LEI is for that trade party.
So Mark, how is this affecting the CRDE functionality that creates both sides based on the single input from firm?
Yeah, sure. So for those who don't know, CRDE is an enrichment engine we as additional service we provide. So that's no impact on that. Brian, it's up to you. You can submit you can submit to that today, submitted for both. We recommend you don't, for the same reasons, that it enriches your message with counterparty data which could be rejected by the GTR. So our advice today has been not to do that, because you are again at risk of your own trade failing because your counterparty has incorrectly put their data into the application, or has got incorrect reference data.
All right, so slide 20, the snapshot submissions.
Sure. So snapshot. So currently today, you can submit in a couple of methods. OTC Lite and ETD are always snapshots. You submit in all the fields to us, and that is effectively your trade state. We call that position today, but in line with ESMA, we're rebranding, if you like, trade state, and also that's in line with SEPA MyArseGo's own definitions. But you can do it through a snapshot, which means tell me what your trade looks like today, or you can do it through the PET and Conf. PET and Conf is built ready from a CFTC, where it's you're telling us what your kind of life cycle events are, and your change in notional or your change in notional is. So it's more of a life cycle event. Today we build that up and then calculate your notional. Going forward, that will not be provided in the new architecture because under the regulations, they require the final or calculated notional to be submitted by firms anyway. So it kind of negates really the PET and Conf functionality anyway. So going forward, we're changing to be more like a snapshot, or to be kind of a snapshot type submission based methodology. We also we went through the amount of field changes that's occurred in the previously. We looked at OTC Lite and ETD, and we looked at those and did it make sense to kind of add and take away fields on those templates, or did it make sense to just almost start with a blank sheet of paper and create a new template? And that's what we did. It's a common template across OT Lite and ETD. We will be publishing in the next week some further analysis, which gives firms some more advice on kind of what the new template refers to for the old template. So for ease of use, we'll be publishing that in the next week.
In the interest of time.
Yeah. The next one is the removal of trusted and priority source. So main trusted source we have in EMEA is DS Match. So we'll be removing that, and the driver there is some certainty around the certainty of fields being submitted that are being applied to the trade. We have had some problems with cross-jurisdiction trades, and also under the rules there needs to be a clear audit of activity kind of matching to your trade state, which isn't always the case with trusted source, because firms might be submitting over that and not all fields are being applied.
So in which case that's just something taken away?
Yeah.
Okay, that's easy.
The next one is the uniqueness of a trade. Currently today we have this concept of UTI lock, which was put in place to kind of ring fence a submission when it comes in the door. EMEA itself, or ESMA itself, defined trade uniqueness to be the concatenation of the UTI and the party 1 and party 2. And so we've just adopted that in its entirety there, which means basically if you change any of those attributes, be the UTI, party 1 or party 2, it becomes a new trade. So therefore, the common attribute that would be changed in this instance on the trade may be the party 2. We have known the counterparty to be changed, and that will actually create a new trade. So if you are changing your counterparty to trade, you'll need to exit the previous trade, because otherwise you'll end up with two trades. But that is in line with the regulation and how ESMA sees the uniqueness of trade, and also the action type validations we have to apply.
Mark, will you enforce that exit, or will firms just have to remember if they forget, they're going to end up with duplicates?
Yeah, they'll have to do it themselves. But we won't know it's a new trade, or whether it's a new trade or whether it's an update of a previous trade.
Right.
So I mean a lot of firms will hopefully, the UTI lock is not particularly common. It has caused not particularly. It's not particularly popular, let's just say. So in a lot of circumstances. So I think a lot of firms will welcome the removal of UTI lock, but at the same time, they must remember if they are changing their counterparty to remove the previous one, previous trade. And the last point, so I'm rushing through this. I mean, I frequently do spend a couple of hours on these points, so getting through them in 10 minutes is somewhat of a challenge. The last point is the action and traction transaction type, and this really goes along the lines of the pet and conf and the decommission of the pet and conf. The pet and conf really works, and it's a life cycle event type submission. It's submitted in with an action and a transaction type, and the transaction type really drives a lot of behaviour and how we process that submission. We're removing the transaction type in effect. That we're removing the functionality of it. It's still there as a field. Firms can still submit against it if they want to know why they've submitted a trade. But really the processing is just driven off the action. It's a pretty simple, as I say, pretty simple processing based on our snapshot approach. So that's really the sort of big change here. Just really new and exit. We're also removing the cancel, so that will not be supported. It doesn't really align with the rules if firms submit a cancel in that regard. So again, the drivers are we're simplifying the submissions, aligning with the ESMA validations, and additionally, just a bit of a kind of gotcha there is the ESMA action types now also include ETD positions, so they hadn't previously, and that is quite a big change to the ETD industry. So we're having to apply the ETD validations or action type validations against ETD positions, which also means we're having to remove our full file functionality for ETD positions.
So what's the time plan from now until all that going live, and how do firms need to be involved? How do they do testing?
Yeah, I mean, our UAT, we're scheduled to open UAT in August. There is a lot of content on the Learning Centre today, the GTR Learning Centre, for the changes, the message specifications. There are some webinars we've already done. They are pre-recorded. There's a couple of short videos. We'll be continuing to provide short videos right up until, well, effectively till go live. There's some data quality aspects or data cleanup we think firms should be doing prior to go live, and we'll be providing more advice on those as well. So I think that the message really I want to get through is keep monitoring the GTR Learning Centre. We do send out email blasts when we put anything of significance up there, but yeah, get on there, bookmark it, put notifications on there so that you're fully aware of anything gets published and updated.
So is the target go live date November the 1st?
It is, yeah.
Okay, and when it does go live, it's all or nothing, so you will switch from the old model to the new model?
Correct, yeah.
Fine, so anybody who's not prepared for November the 1st is going to get a surprise. Okay, so Mark did very well to communicate 2 hours worth of material in 10 minutes.
For more information, please view onto the webinar where a less rushed webinar. There's a few up there actually. So.
Okay, so I'm going to go over. We had some questions that we have got time to go over. Going back to collateral, Alan, somebody asked, all of the new margin fields are listed as optional in the validation rules. Can they be ignored?
I wouldn't say they can be ignored. So my take on that would be that in the validation rules, they're optional because not all of the collateral buckets or collateral types would apply to all trades. The firms should basically report the collateral that does apply. So if you've got a trade out there where you've posted initial margin and you've posted variation margin, I don't think you can ignore that. You have to populate that, otherwise you're misreporting.
There's another reason as well. That's if you've incorrectly reported collateral in the first place. There's actually no way of pulling your message out at the moment. So you'd have to resubmit with effectively blank collateral fields.
Okay.
To overwrite the previous submission.
Okay, I think what we may do, in fact, is send out written answers to these questions afterwards. So we'll do what we can now. Somebody asked a question, with a requirement to report CCP valuations, do we expect indirect clearing firms to delegate their reporting to clearing brokers? So if you've got an indirect clearing firm is a client of a clearing member, I think the question is, are they going to actually push the responsibility back up to the clearing broker? Does anybody know?
So I don't know if you want that one, Mark. It's an interesting idea trying to get the CCP, but I would imagine the choreography between having to report your own trades and having to report separate valuation messages that fully align with those trades would be quite challenging. Don't know if you've got any further thoughts there, Mark?
No, it's a good question. I'm not sure on that one.
Okay.
And sorry, Bill, I mean, that's one of those good examples where the industry just needs to get together and agree what we think is the right best practice across CCPs, clearing brokers, and indirect clearing members, and agree the right approach.
Okay. So this is one for Mark, I think, asking, can you put in the broker ID field a CLC instead of an LEI?
Nope. Broker ID is LEI only. Back to the concept. The only two fields you can submit a CLC, which is an internal code, is when you're counterparty and beneficiary. Again, getting back to the concept here of why they're even allowing an internal code in those two fields is because they might be individuals. A broker would never be an individual; they would always be a legal entity. So therefore, they should always have an LEI.
Okay. Another clearing question. I remember this from when I did trade reporting at LCH. when you book cleared trades, they start off, logically, they're bilateral because you execute them in the bilateral space. They then go for clearing, get split in effect and become alpha, beta and gamma, whatever people call them. So the question is, do we know if the requirement to report the alpha trade is going to go away?
Yeah, so there is something in the text that says if your trade, and it talks about if it's traded on a venue, and they haven't really defined what a trading venue is, although you may assume it'll be the same under the same definition as MiFID. If it's traded on the same and given up on the same day for clearing, then you do not have to report the executing leg. It's just the cleared leg. That's effectively how ETD reports today anyway. But I think it has more. The scope will widen once MiFID comes into effect and the venue is started reported.
Okay. Alan, you wanted to take a question about whether or not an internal LEI was good enough for reporting.
I'm not sure. I mean, the question refers to there was an earlier workaround described using an internal LEI. I'm not familiar with what that workaround was or outlined, but I would counsel that the party fields, and especially the counterparty fields, are the main fields, are amongst the main fields the regulators are looking at, and that wouldn't sound like a good idea to me. You should be doing your utmost to get the correct LEIs for your counterparties and ensure your counterparties have the LEIs.
Okay.
I think also, firms looking at workarounds, and again back to my previous point around the work that the TRs have got to do under Article 81 to provide more better access to regulators. I would echo Alan's comments on that, but you do it at your own peril.
Okay.
Yeah, and sorry about that, I'm just further on that. Certainly the work we're doing, we're seeing helping DC and its members around the kind of the EMEA pairing matching working group. Those nuances or those grey areas that people have assumed a certain practice are now coming in terms of mismatched and broken records. I think the more people get involved in those working groups, the more we're able to work out what is the right, or not necessarily right, what's the consistent and agreed standard way of working around or processing transactions or processing reporting requirements. So at least we all agree that that's how we're going to do it together. Otherwise, we just continue to see a continued amount of pairing and matching breaks.
Okay, there's been a sequence of questions that all, I think, getting at the same point, which is in your new LEI validation approach and the two-sided validation approach, if one party has a failed LEI, I assume that means one party's submission fails, but the other one doesn't.
Yeah, so it depends. Well, it depends what you define as failed LEI. So your LEI, there's a different statuses under GLife, and so it has to be a valid LEI in the first place. Your counterparty has to be a valid LEI, but it can be an LEI which is what's in a lapsed state, so it hasn't been renewed effectively. So that is permitted, but it has to be a valid LEI that is recognised in GLife.
Okay, well, we've used an hour of everybody's time. I think some of these questions are a bit tricky to do verbally. I think what I will do is say thank you to all our speakers, Brian, Stuart, Mark and Alan, and tell everybody that we will answer the questions by email because we have a record of your email address, and so we'll get back to you on that offline and we'll provide that to other people. We have recorded this, and with a bit of editing to make the sound quality the best we can, we will put out a recording of this so that if people want to listen to it again or show it to their friends or family, that's possible. We may also circulate the slides so that people can read what we've written. So thank you everybody for turning up. I'm sorry we couldn't get to all the questions today, but I know what we need to do is go to we need to see that slide. So we didn't get to the next steps, but I think everybody understands they have to have a plan and they need to start testing. So Mark has already said that if you're aiming at the GTR, there's lots of information online. RegTek, we're very glad if you want to have a look at EMEA Ready, because we know that DTCC, whilst not, I suppose, publicly saying they commit and support it, there is a close relationship there, and it's proved to be a valuable tool to make sure that your submissions will work before you go to GTR. and also follow-up. So although he didn't speak today, Andy Green is in the room. He'll be happy to help you with all of this, and so will Elena, who works at RegTek. Both of them are ready to help you get through this. So thank you for coming. I think that's the end of our broadcast, and we'll see you at the next one. Do you want to say goodbye, Brian and Stuart?
Yes, thank you, everybody. Thanks, everyone, for joining. We had great attendance. It hung at well above 200 for the entire presentation, which is excellent. So thanks very much, and thanks to the speakers for participating and Bill for hosting.
You're welcome, Brian. Thanks, Bill.
All right. See you guys. Bye-bye.